and welcome to Hypothetically Intentional, where we ask the question, what if we set intentions for everything we did? I am your son, Andrew.
Whose son? I am Michelle, your mom.
Yes, and who is the your in that question? Or in that statement? Who knows? It's up to interpretation.
That's fair, I guess.
Yeah. Maybe I am your son, listener.
And maybe I am your mom. Wait, no.
No?
No.
No, you don't think that's possible?
I mean anything is possible, I suppose.
Yeah.
Depends on which realm we're in.
I think for the purposes of keeping the word possible meaning something, I think we can go ahead and safely say that that's impossible.
Yes, I like that. Thank you. Thank you for circling us back, not being out in the...
Yeah. Don't believe me. I get into all sorts of thought circles about the specifics of what a word should mean, and then pretty soon it just devolves into that word doesn't mean anything because it could mean anything, and then it's...
I actually love that. I do that too. I think about words a lot because I often find them inadequate, or
Yeah.
I find them having so many different meanings and they're relative to whoever is speaking. And if we have different meanings of the very same word, it makes conversation really tricky. And being able to communicate versus, like it's like the listening piece of that is important.
Yeah.
Gosh, we dove right in really quickly. I didn't mean for that to happen, but
Well,
that was
yeah.
interesting.
We don't pull punches here at Hi. Which is
Hi.
the acronym for our podcast, by the way, in case you didn't pick up on that. Hypothetically Intentional. Hi.
And it does stop at the I.
It does. Yes. We are completely sober, believe it or not.
This is just how we show up in the world.
Yeah. I've been told by some of my friends that I act high sometimes, even when I'm not. Or like I fit into a high group of people very well when I am sober.
I see.
Anyway, that's off the topic. Speaking of the topic, what a segue. Isn't
What
that?
a segue. I mean,
I gotta work on
so
that.
good at this.
Yeah, you're much better at the segues already.
Am I?
Well, you did the good one a couple weeks ago or last week. Anyway, our podcast is called Hypothetically Intentional, about what if we set intentions for everything you did. And it would be kind of silly if we were to make a podcast without setting an intention about it. So every week, we're going to set an intention at the very beginning of the podcast for what we want this podcast to be for, what we want it to, what role we want it to serve, right?
Yeah.
So, I liked what you said about words and their meaning and how they're inadequate a lot of the time. So what do you think about today's intention being, I don't know, maybe something along the lines of like finding ways to trust words, trust communication? Because I think that's an important part about communication is, like, that's something that I've struggled with a lot, is trusting that the person that I'm talking to will, put in the effort to sort of meet me in the middle with the words that I'm saying. Because that's something that I find a hard time doing. So I spend a lot of time, like chiseling out the exact words that I want to use that have the exact meaning that will convey the meaning that I'm trying to convey. And a lot of times that just gets me tripped up, and I take a lot more time. And just end up not saying what I want to say at all. I just, like, someone else talks and then it gets overrun or something like that. So it's something that I find difficult, is being able to trust in someone else that even if the words aren't 100% right, they'll be able to meet me in the middle and try and see understand what I'm talking about. So what do you think about, like, our intention for today's podcast being, not thinking too hard about the words that we're saying, or not getting trapped in that loop? I don't know. What do you think?
When you were speaking, what I was hearing loudly, in addition to you have to trust the person you're speaking with to be willing to communicate with you if they feel some sort of way with regard to what you're saying, right? To be able to have an open conversation. But the other thing I heard is trusting yourself to use the words that actually mean what you're trying to say or to convey. So, because I think that's tricky. So I think it's a two-way street in the trust, right? I trust myself to use the proper words, but then also to watch for body language and for clues that might tell me that whoever I'm speaking with is either misinterpreting potentially or feeling uncomfortable in some sort of way or really resonating. You know, like even now I'm talking to you and you're nodding your head. That tells me that you're following what I'm saying and it's resonating with you in some way. And I would assume, be careful with that, but it's in a positive way. That's how it feels. But if I was speaking and you were sitting there with your arms crossed across your chest and kind of have a scowl on your between your eyebrows, or that might imply to me that, right, there's a lot of different things we can pick up when we speak with people. So I love the idea of not only trusting them to be willing to show up and engage, but also trusting yourself. And honestly, there's so many places we could go with this conversation too, because it brings in healthy boundaries. Like, I'm not going to have a lot of conversations with somebody who either disagrees with me all the time and then go talks to somebody else about how rude I was, or something I said that was ridiculous when they weren't willing to engage with me and have like, well, let's have that conversation and like dig into it a little bit and see how that feels. So yeah, I think that's really interesting. And it's interesting for me because when you were talking too, I thought, oh, that must be an exhausting life to think that hard, to think that hard before having a conversation with someone, but also like coming from the right place and with a lot of practice, that's just a heartfelt conversation. You know, it depends on where you're coming from in that. Like, is it where you get the anxiety comes up because it's a perfectionism thing and you're trying to find all the perfect words to make everyone feel safe? Or is it, P.S., I have these same tendencies. I'm starting to think, like, is this a human thing or is this a mother-son thing? Yeah. And I'm unsure. It might be both. You know, so we might need to get some guests on the podcast just to help us break this stuff down. Yeah. But I do find it interesting, a lot of things you say. I'm like, well, yeah, me too. And then I'm like, is that a human thing or is that a mother-son conditioning thing, right? I mean, because you get all the conditioning that I had and then, you know, that I then passed on to you and all that sort of thing. So it's interesting.
Yeah, probably a bit of both.
Yeah.
But yeah, no. So you go through that too, you said, right?
It depends on the situation. I mean, I think I'm pretty good about reading energy or like getting a feeling for how people are engaging with me or not, or feeling about me. And so it's just something that comes a little naturally to me. So sometimes that makes it more complicated for me because I understand, but I also can feel the resistance of, it just changes, excuse me, I have the hiccups, how I show up. When I feel comfortable enough to get that sort of energetic feeling from someone else, then I'm willing to take the time to really pause and see if I can find words that will open a door for a deeper conversation. But then there's other times where I get the feeling that like that is not welcomed or invited and I shouldn't do that. So I think for that, I'm going into the space of intuition. Like, it helps me to listen to my intuition to see if I should put more effort in. I don't know. Does that make sense? I feel like I'm not being very clear. No, like even in this conversation, I feel like I'm not really explaining that very well, but there is something about like listening to the non-words.
Yeah, like, are you saying like sort of like knowing, almost like picking your battles in a sense of like knowing when it's time to really sort of dig in and like address that instinct to be like super perfectionist with your words, and when it's time to just like let it happen or maybe even back off from the situation if like the other person isn't feeling your energy?
Yeah, and I think the other piece of that for me is, so I'm a teacher, so the more I teach, the more comfortable I am in just showing up authentically and being okay with whatever that looks like. But for me, the most, or maybe one of the most important pieces in that, it might be safe to say most, is to be kind-hearted within it, so that I'm listening both verbally, you know, like out loud and like internally to the room, so to speak, so that I can show up in a way where like I might be in a room full of people having a conversation with several, but I might get sort of like a ping, an energetic ping that I need to like follow up with one of the people in the group later because I said something that, and I want to circle back and just give them an opportunity to like, for me to make it right, or I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think like I've had similar experiences before. Like I remember one time in particular, and I don't know if this is exactly what you're talking about, so just tell me if it is or if it isn't. But this was back sort of when I was in the dorms at college. There was like a group of people on my floor who we would all sort of eat together with a lot of the time. And once a newer person from that floor sort of started eating with us, and it was the first time that they had eaten with us. And a couple of the other people in that group started like the conversation turned like really sort of like dark, but like in the way that like especially my generation of people like really just like makes fun of really serious dark topics. I think they were talking about like suicide and like really making a bunch of jokes that were making me uncomfortable. And I sort of got like, it felt to me sort of like what you described with the ping with that new person. Like I could tell just like by their body language and whatnot that they were really uncomfortable. And they sort of got up and left like basically as soon as they could. So I like reached out to them afterward and like apologized and like talked to them about it. And they were like really nice and cool, and they're still a good friend. But like that's sort of what it made me think of. Is that sort of like the sort of experience that you're talking about? Where you
and I think there's many ways and examples where it comes up and comes in. I mean, and like I'm thinking about like in bigger groups of people. Like sometimes I'm just all of a sudden called to share a story, or, you know, if I'm teaching a certain thing, like sometimes it'll be like, oh, this is the story. And then later after the group thing is done, people will come up afterwards, like a couple, you know, and they'll be like, oh, I really needed to hear that today. It's like, so you just kind of trust that. And that's what I mean by being authentic. I think that's really my point I'm trying to make in this, or where I'm going with that, is that if I'm showing up authentically and really just being present in the room and having my intention be, you know, how do I want to show up today, is I want to be connected to my centered self, to that inner wisdom that we talked about in a different episode, where it's like, I want to show up from that space of limitless, anything is possible, but dropped in, mindful and grounded and really connected. Because I think when we connect, so, you know, I guess I have always been a teacher. I haven't always been as comfortable in teaching. And I think when we get really, really, really nervous and we're just really, because then it's hard to focus on anything else. You can't focus on the room when you're focused on the fact that you're sweating and you're shaking and your voice is cracking and you hope nobody's noticing, right? It's all about you and kind of you feeling your discomfort. But when you kind of can put that aside, it's not that doesn't exist. It's just more like I kind of learned how to put it into a container and understand that's normal. It's going to happen for me every time, and I need to learn how to navigate while that's happening. And so that makes it so that I'm able to be more present in a room and hear people or feel people to have a conversation. And even on one-to-ones, it's the same thing.
Yeah. So when you like put those feelings like in a container, like you said, I know we've talked a lot about like just like not on the podcast about like pushing emotions down and like burying them and how that's often not a very good thing. Do you do anything with those emotions after? Do you open the container ever? I'm
not sure it's a rigid container. It's more like I acknowledge it, I accept it as my reality, and so it becomes less uncomfortable. So I'm not stuffing them down. It's more like I'm accepting them and surrendering to them. If that makes sense. It's hard to do. It takes practice and time, and I can't always do it. I just took a class where I had to do a speech, and it was like the most awful speech I've ever given. That's how it felt to me. You know, and I went back and rewatched it, and I'm like, here's the thing that was missing. I was so nervous. Like my normal spark, my normal fire, my normal like playfulness, it wasn't there because I was using an outline. I was, you know, trying to show up in the way that we were supposed to. And it wasn't a bad speech. It wasn't, but it felt like that that was an instance where I couldn't bottle up or container I just couldn't contain it and be comfortable with it in that way. It was it's that whole brand new, like we talked about in a couple weeks ago. I was talking about how like I'm in a new room with new people having to do a thing. I'm very comfortable in my own communities, but when I step out into new things, the vibration of the discomfort gets louder, and then it's harder for me to like connect with the people on a deeper level. It's harder for me to, because if I'm being honest, there's a piece of me that's like, I cannot wait till this is over. I'm so uncomfortable right now. I just want it to be done. Whereas if I can get outside of that and drop in and be in that space of, I'm just here to be in service. And if I can help anybody, it's great. Mm-hmm. And that's the mindset more and more I'm settling into and realizing is like hypothetically intentional, to really put my messy mind at rest, to get into that heart space and realize that I'm not showing up to prove anything. I'm showing up in service, and that's a very different thing. I don't know.
Yeah.
Was that your question?
Yeah.
Did I just go off on a big long tangent?
Yes and yes, on all accounts. But no, that's great. Like I like that. Like I like that like metaphor of like the vibration of like that anxiety, and how like I'm in a counseling psychology course, and we talk about a lot of like techniques that different sort of psychologists will try to teach people who are struggling with various things or getting help for some reason. And one technique that I really liked was like if someone is like obsessing over something, over a particular thought, or like in that example, something like I'm really sweaty and awkward in this social situation or something like that. A lot of times your instinct will be to push against that, and like if you're aware of that and trying to get out of that, you'll say, no, I'm not, I'm okay, I'm doing good, like I'm very comfortable, nobody's thinking about me, I'm totally cool. But the technique that they showed was to agree with that buzzing in your head. Say, yes, you are. You are anxious, you are sweating. People might be even noticing and thinking that it's weird, but that's okay. And like once you say that and like say it yourself, then you're sort of taking control over it again, because you are the one who's recognizing it.
Yeah, and we just did this in a meditation class I took with Shaman Jack. It was amazing. He was talking about that. Like when you go to meditate, you start fighting with yourself. I mean, like, why might I be dreaming this? This is dumb. This is just my imagination. This isn't real. I'm not actually meditating. And his point was just agree with it. Because if you argue with it, you're feeding an energy that you don't want to feed. Whereas if you just say, yes, that's true, I'm still going to do it. Mm-hmm. There's an acceptance there that then your mind stops fighting and just goes, oh, okay. And it's not that easy. Yeah. But there is a piece of that is, and I found it to be really true and really helpful. Like he even had us take like that voice inside our head that gets in the way when we meditate, or even like you could do it with any example, like being messy in your mind. Like my mind can be cruel to myself sometimes, to like personify that voice.
Yeah, that was another technique.
Take it out and set it on the desk. Imagine it like 10 to 12 inches tall. So this is hysterical. We're in this class, right? And I do this, and I'm getting good about my clairvoyance, like my seeing in my third eye, right in my mind's eye. And so I sit myself on the desk, or I stand her on the desk, and I tell her, it's time for you to be quiet. I'm going to meditate now. We'll pick this up when I'm done. And she literally, like me, the hologram of myself on the table, like crossed her arms, sat in preference legs, and went, fuck off. Like just like gave me this attitude, but she was quiet. Like she did what she was told, but she wasn't going to go down without a fight, you know? I thought it was amazing. I was like, oh, I love that. So now I'm doing that all the time. Like just like taking that little voice in my head and just telling her like, you're important, but right now you need to be quiet.
Yeah, go do your work.
Exactly.
No,
it's amazing. It's such a cool tool. And I've done similar things, but the way he had us like put her on the table, you know, like I put myself on the table and just said, not right now.
Yeah.
That's it.
That's really cool, because that's almost exactly what for that same class, one of the like assignments our week was to listen to a podcast, which was telling the story of like, it was like interviewing a really little girl. I think she was like 7 or 8 or something like that, who had obsessive compulsive disorder, OCD. And one of the things that like this behavioral therapist told her to do was personify your OCD, give it a name, and she called it OC. So this is OC, and OC is saying this, but and OC is a part of you, but OC is not all of you. So you like being able to give it to a name, like it worked with the little girl really, really well because she was able to understand that. Like it's like a character, it's a person. But it's not all of me. It's not this disastrous thing that's going to control everything. I'm in control. I'm like, I don't know. It was really cool.
Yeah.
Maybe we can put a link to that podcast in the description.
That would be really cool. The other thing, so we do this in Choose Yourself too, with the whole personifying, like, you know, you got that negative voice in your head, or the one that kind of like just gets in your way and tries to keep you stuck where you are, doesn't really want you to move forward because there's like fear in that. Uh-huh. Like they like things to stay the same. So we'll personify that. Give it a name, and recognize that it's there to teach you something. Like there is a lesson in it, and it's a good thing. It's not a bad thing, but it helps to be able to separate it out sometimes. But then there's also this other side of you that is like the limitless, most powerful. I mean that in a kind and loving way, not like trying to, you know, not in that kind of way. But you know, and so that you can give that a name as well. And so you have like, you know, it's like you're segregating out like these pieces of yourself that you can, but you can interact with them and engage with them. And I think for me, at least how it feels in the now, as I use these tools, for me, it's a way to relinquish that tendency toward perfectionism and a need to control, to feel safe. It's more like, well, okay, these are compartments of me. And this one I need to not pay so much attention to anymore. This negative, you know, voice that's being really unkind to myself at the moment, and, you know, with really high expectations that are absolutely unattainable, you know. Uh-huh. And then there's this other piece of me that can literally do anything. Like I think about, like, that is the person that I connected to, like when business was shut down during COVID. I was like, well, I can either like get negative and say I'm not supposed to do this, or I can fight like hell and say I'm going to do this, and I'm gonna like listen to this boss babe over here that is telling me that you've got this and you're gonna figure it out one way or another, you know. And so it's just interesting. So I just find those kind of tools really helpful. And I love learning from, I'm a seeker. I will forever want to learn from other people, even if it's something. I teach meditation classes, and I took Jack's class and it was amazing, you know. So it's, I always learn something from everyone. Everybody is our teacher. Mm-hmm. That's how it feels. If you're paying attention and if you're open to it, it's fascinating.
Yeah.
So I have an idea.
Okay. I
feel like this one, like we've kind of addressed a lot of things. We actually unpacked a lot in this episode. Yeah. We went different places than we intended, but I don't know that, I think that will happen every time. Mm-hmm. And I like that. But what if we end the podcast with a beginning again, and then we can pick which one we like the best? Because we talked about this podcast being an intro to the podcast.
Oh.
And so we end with the opening, just so we have two to pull from.
Okay.
And it might be confusing for the audience.
I see what
Do you know what I'm saying? I'm saying we close with our opening.
Close with our opening.
Yeah, and then we take whichever take is better. You're witnessing our creative process here. And it might be a little messy. Uh-huh. But here's the thing. As somebody who like used to be a ridiculous perfectionist who was afraid to fail and afraid to succeed, by the way, right? Like this feels really good to just allow to be messy in the beginnings of this podcast and not have it completely perfectly set up. Mm-hmm. So that's how this is going to evolve.
Okay. I like it. So, do you want me to say it again, to give the intro, or do you want to do it for this time to shake things up?
I want it to be your voice.
If
you're okay with that. Yeah.
I'm okay with that. Hi, and welcome to Hypothetically Intentional, where we ask the question, what if we set intentions for everything we did? I'm your co-host, Andrew.
And I'm Michelle.
And we'll see you next time.
We're glad you're here. Bye.